Hello, my name is Robert Schmid. I am Deloitte Digital's Chief IoT Technologist, also known as Mr. IoT. And this week on Coffee with Mr. IoT, my co-host Rachel Moorman and I are talking with Arun. Arun is a partner in our security practice, and we're going to talk about what's been going on lately and how come IoT has taken over the internet at one point in time. Arun, welcome to our show. How are you doing?
I'm doing great, Robert. Thank you. Thank you for having me here.
Arun, tell us what you do for Deloitte. You can explain this better than I can. I know I just call you when we want security expertise around IoT, but you do a much better job at that.
Yeah, so Robert, I am, I would say, a self-confessed security and technology geek. Grew up professionally here in the Valley. Prior to my stint at Deloitte, I was at Sun Microsystems, writing kernel-level code in the security space, and then decided to switch over to the dark side of consulting. And over the last 11 years, have really been at the forefront of helping some of our leading technology clients across a wide array of cyber risk services and cyber risk issues.
So cyber risk, security, and issues, this is a hot topic for us on a weekly basis. We've heard everything from it's a barrier for adoption. People are scared incredibly to adopt some of these cool IoT technologies because security risk. We've heard there's mitigation strategies, but nothing's foolproof and you're never going to be completely secure. And we've heard that buildings can talk to lights, that can talk to people, that can talk to machines. So we've heard kind of everything in between. So I think we're curious, Robert and I, what's new? You said you're on the forefront. What's cutting edge in security and risk as it relates to this IoT landscape? What keeps you up at night and what keeps your clients up at night?
Yeah, and I think some of the points that you raised just now, Rachel. I mean, with IoT essentially kind of being the new wave of evolution in technology, right? This whole uber connectivity and interconnectedness between devices, things, and people is essentially, from our viewpoint, really dramatically increasing the exposure from a risk standpoint, right? So what used to be your traditional enterprise with your four walls, with your kind of IT perimeter, has now really transcended into multiple other domains which are all interconnected, which clearly increases the risk exposure. So we are at the forefront, as I said, of really helping our clients and organizations think through how do they evolve their cyber risk strategies to mitigate and account for some of these new risk exposures.
Arun, I have a question for you so I really want to get to what happened on October 21st because your team wrote a really interesting article. But before we get there, I can't help myself to talk about how I feel there's so much fear and doom out there, and so much of that drives our actions nowadays. Is it all fear or doom, and what's the hope out there? Tell me about the good side of it, all the stuff that we can actually do. Give me some sort of like the good stuff, because I don't know. If you come to fear and doom with me, I'm just going to walk away. Give me some of the good stuff.
Yeah. No, I think that's an excellent question, right, Robert? This whole FUD factor, fear, uncertainty, and doubt has been around for a while, and you can argue a lot of core security researchers and specialists kind of use that, but I'm actually very enthused about innovation and where the markets are going. Whether it's in relation to IoT or whatnot, there is so much business value that has to be had. And when we sit down and talk to our clients, we really talk to them about how do they cyberize innovation, right? So in relation to, as they think about adopting new business models, whether it's leveraging IoT or what have you, making sure security and data privacy and cyber risk aspects are a fabric of your kind of innovation mindset is what is going to be super important, right? So, and that can actually end up becoming a differentiator and an enabler for organizations as they take their products and services to the market. So I would actually tend to agree with you. I'm probably more, while we are all jaded by the number of security breaches, I think there is a lot more to look forward to with regards to innovation and where the larger marketplace is heading.
It's also
shocking that we don't hear about the
almost a little bit like, we now know how to build houses, and nobody would ever forget to put a lock on their door when they build a house. But when it comes to IoT, sometimes we do, or if we put a lock on there, we don't put a key in there, or if we don't have a lock, we might forget to lock. But it's sort of like standard for any of us to think of when we build a house to put a lock on the door. It seems like when it comes to IoT, that's not always the case.
That's right. No, that is definitely true. In fact, I saw an ad, I think in one of the newspapers the other day, the digital newspapers, that is, wherein there's this retail salesman basically trying to sell a refrigerator to a customer, and then essentially at the end of the sale process, he said, could I incite you in buying a firewall along with the refrigerator, right? So that's where things have come to, in relation to your Uber connected home, and whether it's not just your home, but just cities and facilities in general, and just the connectivity that comes along with it.
Rachel?
You're like looking at me to validate. No, I mean, I think what I'm curious about is, you mentioned that we only hear the bad things, but yes, those are the ones that make the news. So I want to go into kind of what those news shocking stories are, and either debunk the magnitude of them or help people understand why they occurred and how they can be avoided. So, because I think in talking to most of our security and risk experts, what the news sensationalizes isn't necessarily the real reality that we see for our clients when we are engaged and involved. So should we dive into what happened on the 21st?
Absolutely. So yeah, I think the October 21st DDoS attack, right, or breach was interesting and unique in a few aspects. So I mean, as I mentioned earlier, in the show, a lot of us have been jaded by just the magnitude and the number of security attacks and breaches that have happened over the last, ostensibly 4 to 5 years, right? Not a day passes by when there is, not in the news, you don't hear about, a particular security breach. But what was really unique about the DDoS attack on the 21st is just the scale and impact, primarily driven by leveraging an army of IoT devices, right, to actually launch the attack, and I'll get to that in a second as to why that was so unique, and two, the target was actually a critical internet services provider, right? So the ripple effect caused downstream, essentially ended up crippling multiple other organizations that were consumers of that internet services provider, right? So I think those two aspects were pretty unique, and I think this was probably the first real kind of major attack which leveraged IoT devices and drew attention to the fact that a lot of them are actually inherently insecure or are built inherently insecure, right? And which is why my point around, as we innovate and look to kind of adopt this next wave of technology evolution, be it IoT, be it something else, making sure cyber aspects are included right from the get-go are critically important.
So I read.
Can you guys explain first, maybe Robert, you were going there. Can you explain what exactly happened on the 21st in case people aren't aware?
Sure.
Rachel, I just wanted to say sorry I stomped on you before. I hate doing that, so apologize for that. So Arun, yes, I wanted to say that. But I wanted to say, Arun, what was interesting is that you said this, it was done to a provider to large companies, which therefore meant it wasn't a direct attack on Twitter or a direct attack on GitHub. It was actually an attack of a provider to them, which meant the impact was bigger because of this. But the other thing that happened, and that was really interesting to me, is that the devices that were used, they all came from one tech provider offshore.
That's right.
And if I read this correctly, you had a paper, and we'll publish it afterwards here for people to read up on. But the interesting thing for me was they had default passwords built in that couldn't even be changed by me.
That's right.
So the only choice is to keep those devices offline. How do people know when they get this? And maybe you can talk a little bit more about that.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, so just dissecting the anatomy of the attack, right? Essentially, what ended up happening is, the Mirai malware, which was published or released earlier this year around the August timeframe, they basically leveraged a vulnerability in these IoT devices by a manufacturer, Zhongmai Technologies, which creates a lot of the core components and modules for IP cameras, DVRs, etc. All of which are connected, right? And the vulnerability was essentially the fact that they had, a hard-coded username password for the root account, which is the most powerful account on these devices, and they actually had a insecure protocol like Telnet enabled. So essentially, what ended up happening is the malware was able to exploit that vulnerability, take control over Telnet using the default username and password, which, like you said, cannot be changed, take control of these devices. And once, a lot of these devices were owned, they basically formed the Mirai botnet, which was then used to launch the attack, right? So the command and control server as part of the Mirai botnet was able to control this army of IoT devices to essentially target a distributed denial of service to DIN, right, which was the internet services provider in question. I mean, DIN, as some of you may know, provides DNS services to a lot of big organizations like Twitter and Netflix and Spotify. And once they were able to launch this attack on DIN, it essentially had a ripple effect on a number of these organizations, whose websites were effectively inaccessible.
Do you see this happening again and again? Are we going to see more of these news articles pop up? Are we going to have another widespread outage? Are we going to keep seeing this over and over again, or is this an opportunity to learn from our lessons and kind of move forward, and everyone's fixed everything and it won't happen again?
Yeah, no, I think there is most definitely there's a huge opportunity to learn from this attack, right, Rachel? Essentially, and this goes back. I mean, in a lot of such security breach scenarios, it goes back to fundamentals, right? I mean, fundamentals like do not hard code username passwords in the code, right? Change default usernames and passwords, use stronger authentication, disable insecure protocols like Telnet. I mean, essentially, it comes back, unfortunately, down to fundamentals that, whether you're a product device manufacturer or an organization or entity, you're not adhering to those fundamentals, right? So for me, that was really the big takeaway, and we see that time and time again. And again, that's what we go and have conversations with our clients and organizations about is, make sure your cyber strategy addresses the fundamentals and accounts for a lot of other aspects that you would need to bake in from a requirement perspective when it comes to innovation.
Perfect. So if you guys are just joining us, you're watching Coffee with Mr. IoT. Today, Robert and I are talking to Arun, a subject matter expert in the space of cybersecurity. And we're kind of diving in deep to what happened October 21st with the widespread cybersecurity attack and outage, why that happened, what that means for the future. But Robert, I'm curious. You haven't done your off-topic questioning line yet. I'm just waiting for it.
You're just waiting for an off-topic question?
Yeah. It wouldn't be a Coffee with Mr. IoT without that.
So I'm thinking of this from an IoT point of view, right? And so I read in there, you talked about how, and I know this is still on topic, I'm so sorry, but I'm just really intrigued by all this. I think it's interesting because one of the things when I read this is it talks about how this was from one manufacturer and actually other people white labeled their product. For me, this comes back to a little bit trust and, whom do I partner with, right? I mean, isn't there a big part of this in terms of like, I always say IoT is a family sport, right? It's a family business. It's a team sport. You can't do it alone. But it sort of like reminds me of, I pick my friends carefully, and this is the same is true here. You want to pick someone you trust, and you want to pick someone that does their homework, because really, in this case, it all came down to one bad apple in the whole bowl. Is that true? How do I pick good partners for this? Yeah, Arun, what do I do?
No, I think you're hitting a critical vein here, Robert, in relation to when I think about cyberizing innovation, right? Like what is so unique, whether you're an organization that is looking to, IoT enable the enterprise, or you're looking to, IoT enable your product set, which is eventually, which will eventually be consumed by your customers. To a large extent, there are going to be a multitude of business partners and vendors that essentially form your extra price, right? So making sure, whether it's partners in your supply chain, whether it's partners that are, that you're engaging with to essentially create your IoT enabled products, having secure by design principles, and making sure security and privacy requirements are clearly communicated to these partners, so they basically have a certain standard is going to be imminently important, right? So having a strong, I would say, third-party kind of risk management strategy in relation to vendor partners that you're engaged with is going to be critically important. And we have seen differing models, right? So for instance, a lot of our organizations actually incentivize partners who are able to get to a higher level of security standards and incentivize them with more business, right? So there are varying models that we are seeing in relation to enforcing or parlaying some of the core security and privacy requirements, down to your vendor partner base and to your extra price, if you will.
Arun, I have a question for you. We've talked a lot about the risks and how to prevent the risks. What I don't think we have talked about is what to do when this happens to me. So now I am Netflix or I am Spotify or Twitter, and I get hacked. What do I do? I have to say I've been in this position. I've been when I was at Activision, we've had things happen like this. Yeah, a very interesting process that we go through. Do you want to talk a little bit about this? Because I think it's really interesting, because I think actually response to an attack is almost as important as prevention of an attack.
Right. No, absolutely. And I think this is where having a sound resiliency strategy and an incident response program is going to be critically important, right? So, essentially I would say, 4 broad principles, that we would encourage our clients and organizations to kind of keep in mind. So one is protect your extra price, which we talked about. Plan for the worst, right? So in relation to making sure, I mean, a lot of these organizations probably didn't even think that something like this could happen, right? Wherein one of their core internet services providers would be DDoS, and that would have a ripple effect. And the way you can kind of be better prepared for scenarios like that is, for instance, doing things like cyber war games, right, and simulation exercises that go through multiple different scenarios, and you are essentially prepared and have like a well laid out protocol and a workflow that you can then employ if such a thing were to happen in real life, right? And another thing that I truly believe in is, just as how time is continuous and not discrete, so are the impacts of a breach, right? So making sure once you have, if you have gone through a breach, or others within your marketplace have experienced the effects of a breach, learning from that and making sure you factor those learnings in, as part of your incident response program and as part of your strategy is going to be critically important.
Wow, so it's the fire drill for the modern day. We used to make sure you could exit the building, and now we got to make sure you can successfully survive a cyber attack. I think that's interesting. So speaking of that, one of the topics that came up in past shows was what people do personally. So if you see this at a corporate level, I imagine you might be more sensitive to security, cybersecurity in your own life. So from a home perspective, have you taken any steps, either actually within your home automation or within your devices as it relates to security, or any recommendations for our viewers in that regard?
Yeah, I'll go back to some of the points I raised earlier, right, Rachel? So one of the first things that I do as soon as I get in a smart device and kind of include that in my home network is change all the default usernames and passwords, right? Disable insecure protocols, enable SSH. So if I as an administrator want to access the console, it's over secure protocols, and I have a strong password, strong authentication. So wow. Simple things like that, right? It doesn't take a whole lot of time, and frankly, a lot of the consumer products make it pretty simple for you to do that. So I would say just taking the extra 5 minutes in kind of adopting some of these fundamentals is critically important, right? And of course, as a security practitioner, I'm probably a little more a little more conscious of the things that I need to do within my internal home network than probably others are. But it's if you stick to the fundamentals, I think 80% or 90% of the attacks that you would probably be open to could be avoided.
So Arun, we're coming to an end here. We'll talk about changing default passwords. I always have to put a plug-in for two-factor authentication wherever possible. But before I close, what haven't we asked you that we should have asked you?
So I think you guys covered pretty much all the aspects, at least in relation to what we were going to talk about today. I think the only thing that I would want to highlight again, Robert, is one of the things you mentioned earlier, right? Is for me the big takeaway here is not the fear, uncertainty, and doubt. I'm someone who's always sees the glass half full as opposed to half empty. So the prospects of IoT and the benefits, both business and technology benefits that it offers to us in our personal lives and our organizations are enormous, right? But just making sure in today's world you put on the appropriate locks in the door, you're kind of monitoring for that, and are resilient if something bad were to happen. As long as those core facets are factored in, I think the sky is the limit in relation to the benefit we can derive from some of these new trends.
Well, I'm gonna close on the note of the sky's the limit. It looks like our coffee break is coming to a close. I want to thank you, Arun, for a great conversation. Thank you so much. And please join Rachel, Norman, and me again next Friday, 9 a.m. Pacific, noon Eastern, for another Coffee with Mr. IoT. And by the way, if you missed any part of today's conversation, you can watch this episode again on my YouTube channel. With that, thank you, everyone. Have a great Friday.
Thank you so much, guys. Happy Veterans Day.
Thank you, guys. Bye. Happy Veterans Day.